The rain had been falling since morning, tapping softly against the window of Emma's Seattle apartment. The gray skies matched the mood she had been carrying lately: lonely, restless, and unsure of what direction her life was heading. She had bought a tall, heavy bookshelf the week before, thinking it would make her small living room feel less empty. But when the large box arrived, she realized she had no idea how to put it together. That was why she had called Daniel. Daniel had been her best friend since college. He was the kind of person who always showed up when she needed help, steady.com. And dependable in ways most people weren't. He walked in carrying his usual warm smile, shaking the rain off his jacket. Emma tried not to notice how he seemed to fill the space just by being there. She reminded herself, as she always did, that he was her best friend and nothing more. At least, that was what she told herself. "All right," Daniel said, clapping his hands together as he looked at the box. "Let's turn this pile of wood into something that actually stands." Emma laughed, though her heart beat a little faster than normal. They dragged the box across the floor and began unpacking the pieces. Soon, screws and wooden planks covered the carpet, and the instruction manual lay open between them. Emma crouched down, holding one of the larger boards in place while Daniel searched for the right bolt. "Hold this steady," he said, his voice calm but close enough that she could feel his breath stir a strand of her hair. She tightened her grip, pretending not to notice how near he was. He leaned in with the wrench, guiding the bolt into place. His hand brushed hers, firm and solid. She expected him to move it away quickly, but he didn't, not right away. His grip tightened as he turned the wrench, and for one fleeting moment, she felt the strength in his hand. It wasn't anything unusual. Daniel was just focused, working carefully like he always did. But to Emma, that small moment felt like something much bigger. A strange shiver ran down her spine. She froze, her thoughts stumbling into confusion. Why was her heart racing over something as simple as holding a piece of wood with her friend? She pulled her hand back quickly, almost dropping the board. Daniel glanced up, eyebrows raised. "You okay?" he asked. Emma nodded too fast. "Yeah, just sorry slipped." He didn't push her. He never did. He just smiled gently, as if her clumsiness was nothing new, and went back to tightening the bolt. But Emma couldn't focus anymore. Her mind kept circling back to that single brush of his hand against hers. She had felt him harden his grip with the wrench, felt the warmth of his palm. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. Her chest tightened as she knelt there, pretending to study the instruction manual. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel like this. Daniel was her safe place, her oldest friend, the person who had seen her through breakups, job changes, and every restless season of her life. If she crossed that invisible line, everything could fall apart. But what if? What if he had felt something too? The thought made her stomach twist. She looked up at him quickly, studying his face for clues. He was focused, brows drawn together in concentration, lips pressed in that familiar line he always had when solving a problem. Nothing in his expression betrayed what he was thinking. Maybe he hadn't noticed at all. Maybe it was only her heart that had betrayed her. The rain outside grew heavier, filling the silence between them. The only sound in the room was the steady clink of metal as Daniel tightened another screw. Emma forced herself to hold the board still, to keep her hands steady. Though inside she was trembling. She thought back to college, the first time she had met Daniel in the campus library. He had been studying, surrounded by stacks of books, looking like he belonged there more than anyone else. They had started talking by accident, and before long, they had become inseparable. Through the years, people had always assumed they were more than friends, but Emma had always laughed it off. Daniel had too, and maybe that was why they had lasted this long. But tonight, sitting on the carpet of her apartment with his hand brushing against hers, Emma wasn't laughing. She wasn't even sure she was breathing right. Something had shifted, and she couldn't explain why. The bookshelf loomed half-finished in front of them. But Emma's thoughts weren't on the furniture anymore. They were on the question building in her chest, one she wasn't ready to ask, and one she didn't want answered. What if I want him in a way I can't take back? She shook her head, trying to clear the thought, but it lingered. It clung to her like the rain against the glass, steady and impossible to ignore. Daniel finally sat back, brushing his hands off on his jeans. "We're halfway there," he said, flashing her a smile. "Not bad for two amateurs, huh?" Emma smiled back, but her voice caught. "Yeah, not bad." She wanted to say more, to fill the silence before it swallowed her whole. But the words tangled inside her. She couldn't tell him what she had felt. Not yet. Instead, she reached for another board, forcing her hands to stay steady. But she knew the truths. Something had already changed. And no matter how much she tried to hide it, she couldn't unfeel what had happened. Her heart whispered a warning. She had stepped too close to the edge, and she wasn't sure if she had the strength to step back. The living room felt different now, as if the air itself carried a quiet weight neither of them could name. The bookshelf stood half-built, boards leaning against the wall, screws scattered across the floor. Emma tried to keep her focus on the instructions, but her eyes kept drifting toward Daniel. Every movement he made seemed sharper, more noticeable the way his fingers twisted the wrench, the way his shoulders flexed as he leaned forward. She told herself it was just her imagination. But she knew something inside her had already shifted. Daniel noticed her silence. He always did. He leaned back on his heels, studying her face with that steady calm of his. "You're really quiet tonight," he said. "Everything okay?" Emma forced a smile, gripping the edge of the paper in her hands. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." It was a lie, and she knew he could probably tell. Daniel had always been good at reading her. But instead of pressing, he simply nodded, as though giving her space to hide in her own excuses. That kindness only made her heart ache more. She reached for the next plank, sliding it into place. Daniel moved closer to help, his arm brushing against hers as he steadied the board. She told herself not to notice, not to react. But then his hand lingered on hers, again accidental, unplanned. Yet so full of meaning it stole the air from her lungs. Neither of them spoke. For a few seconds, the world outside the window disappeared. The rain faded, the city noise vanished, and there was only his hand on hers, warm and solid. She should have pulled away. She should have pretended nothing happened. But her fingers froze, caught in the stillness of that moment. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She wondered if Daniel could hear it too. He didn't move. His eyes flicked toward her, searching, questioning. It wasn't playful like the touches they'd shared before when teasing each other over spilled coffee or clumsy accidents. This was different. Intentional, careful. His silence asked a question she wasn't ready to answer. Finally, she pulled her hand back, her chest tight with panic. "Sorry," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. Daniel cleared his throat, leaning back slightly. "It's fine," he said softly. But his voice held something unfamiliar, something deeper, heavier. The quiet between them grew louder. Emma bent her head over the instructions, though the words blurred on the page. Her thoughts spun in circles. Had she just imagined everything? Or had there really been something in the way his hand paused, the way his eyes lingered? She wanted to believe she was wrong. It would be easier if she was. But her body betrayed her, her hands still trembled. Her pulse refused to calm. The minutes stretched as they worked, but the bookshelf no longer felt like the center of their task. Every small brush of movement, every shared glance carried new weight. Emma could barely hold a screw steady. She was afraid of breaking the silence, but more afraid of what might come if she spoke at last. Daniel set the wrench down and leaned back against the couch, letting out a slow breath. His eyes stayed on her, serious now. No trace of the easy humor he usually carried. "Emma," he said carefully, "can I ask you something?" Her throat tightened. She knew what was coming before he said it. She wanted to stop him, to change the subject, to keep their friendship safe inside the walls it had always lived in. But her body refused to move. "Have you ever thought about us?" Daniel asked quietly. The words landed heavy in the space between them. Emma's lips parted, but no sound came. She had thought about them more times than she could count. In quiet hours, when she couldn't sleep, in moments when his laughter had made the world seem brighter. But those thoughts had always been hidden, locked away where neither of them could touch them. Her eyes stung as she forced herself to speak. I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. You're my best friend, Daniel. I don't want to ruin that. Daniel nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He looked down at his hands, rubbing his thumb across his palm. I don't want to ruin it either, he said, his tone low and thoughtful. But tonight, it feels like we crossed some kind of line. Kima's breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off the way she always had when people teased them about being more than friends. But this time, the truth pressed too hard against her chest. She couldn't pretend anymore. Her mind raced through every memory they shared the night studying in the library. The road trips filled with laughter, the comfort of having someone who always understood her. If she let this change, there would be no going back. She could lose everything. But another thought pushed its way in. What if she had already gone too far? What if the line had been crossed the moment she let her heart race at his touch? The moment she let herself hope for something more? She wanted to run, to escape the heaviness building between them, but her body stayed rooted to the floor. She could only look at him, her eyes wide, her lips trembling, caught in the truth she had been avoiding for years. Daniel leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Emma, I need to know. If you feel something too, tell me, because I can't keep pretending nothing's there. Her chest rose and fell as if the air itself had turned to stone. She wanted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. She could feel them pressing against her throat. Desperate to escape, yet fear kept them locked away. Instead, she looked at him, eyes glistening, unable to speak but unable to lie, and in that silence, Daniel seemed to understand. He sat back slowly, his gaze dropping to the half-built bookshelf. The moment passed, but the air still burned with the weight of unspoken truth. Emma clutched the instruction sheet with trembling hands, staring at the blurred ink. She had always believed friendship was safer than love, but tonight had shown her something she couldn't unsee. The line between them had been drawn years ago, and now, for the first time, they were both standing on the edge of it. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, the rain outside drumming softly against the window. The apartment smelled faintly of wet coats and warm coffee, a cozy contrast to the storm of emotions brewing inside. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the half-finished bookshelf. But her mind wasn't on wood or screws anymore. It was on Daniel, the way he had looked at her, the weight behind his words, the way her heart had leaped and tripped over itself the moment he asked about them. Daniel leaned back on the couch, watching her, his expression unreadable but heavy with thought. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable but electric. Every small sound, the tapping of rain, the soft creak of the floorboards, the occasional shuffle of their hands seemed amplified in the tension-filled room. Emma tried to force herself to focus on something else, anything else, but her thoughts kept circling back to him. You've been quiet since I asked, Daniel said finally, his voice low, cautious, but carrying an edge of vulnerability she had never heard before. Emma swallowed hard. She wanted to respond with a joke or a shrug, to retreat behind the safe walls of friendship they had built over years. But the truth was too loud, too insistent. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never thought about it this way. Ah. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he had expected her hesitation. Neither have I, he admitted. But tonight, something feels different, and I can't ignore it. Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to protest, to say that their friendship was enough, that nothing more was necessary, that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. But she couldn't, because somewhere deep inside, she had been hoping for this moment. Even if she hadn't allowed herself to admit it, the air seemed to hum with unspoken questions. Emma's hands twitched as she reached for another screw, but her grip faltered. Daniel noticed immediately and moved closer, kneeling beside her to steady the board. His arm brushed hers, not forcefully, but close enough that her skin tingled. She tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it didn't matter, but every nerve in her body screamed that it did. You feel it too, don't you? He asked softly, almost a whisper. Emma's heart jumped. She wanted to deny it, to shake her head and retreat behind the familiar shield of friendship. but the truth was written in the way her fingers brushed against his, in the way her pulse raced, in the way her lips had parted without thinking. She couldn't lie to him, not now, not after everything that had passed between them tonight. "Yes," she admitted finally, her voice trembling. "I feel it. I didn't mean to, but I do." Daniel's eyes softened, and for a moment, relief and tension collided in his gaze. He reached out slowly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just physical, it was everything she had been holding back for years. Finally surfacing, undeniable and alive. "I've been trying to ignore it," Daniel confessed, his hand hovering near hers, hesitant. "I didn't want to risk what we have. But tonight, I can't anymore. I need to know if there's more. If we could be more than friends." Emma's breath caught. The words hung in the air, weighty and fragile. She had imagined this moment countless times in her head, each scenario ending differently. Each fear and hope twisting into something she couldn't untangle. But now, hearing it from him, feeling the raw sincerity in his voice, everything felt real, immediate, and frighteningly beautiful. Her mind raced. What if they took this step and it ruined everything? What if she lost the person who had always been her anchor? But another voice whispered louder, telling her that denying her feelings had already cost her too much. The warmth in her chest, the ache in her hands, the longing in her heart, they were all signs that she couldn't ignore. "I don't want to lose you either," she admitted, her eyes searching his. "But I don't know if I can go back if we try this. If we cross that line, it changes everything." Daniel reached out then, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was firm, reassuring, but also carried a vulnerability that matched hers. "I know," he said, "and I don't want to force you. But I can't pretend nothing's there. I can't pretend I don't want this us. Not anymore." Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had spent years building walls around her heart, believing friendship was safe, believing she didn't need more. But tonight, those walls had begun to crumble. She had gone too far by letting herself feel, and yet in that same moment, it felt like the only right choice she could make. The rain outside had picked up, drumming against the windows in a steady, insistent rhythm, echoing the storm inside her. Every beat of her heart matched the rhythm, fast and unpredictable. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him, seeing every line of worry and hope etched into his face. She saw herself reflected there, the same fear, the same longing, the same need for connection. Without thinking, she leaned slightly closer, drawn by the gravity of unspoken emotions. Daniel mirrored her, the space between them shrinking, the world outside fading to nothing. It was quiet, but the silence carried more than words ever could. In that space, everything they had ever felt, everything they had hidden from each other became palpable, undeniable. "Alive. I don't know what happens next," she whispered, almost to herself. "But I know I can't pretend anymore." Daniel's hand squeezed hers gently, a silent promise of understanding and patience. "Then we take it one step at a time," he said. "Together." Her heart swelled with a mix of fear and exhilaration. It was terrifying, yes, to risk everything for a chance at something more. But it was also exhilarating because for the first time, she felt seen in a way that went beyond friendship, beyond comfort, beyond years of unspoken longing. The rain continued to fall, a soft, rhythmic soundtrack to the quiet revelation unfolding between them. Emma let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time that evening. The tension, the fear, the longing, they were all still there. But now they existed in a space where hope had room to grow. Daniel finally released her hand, but his presence remained close, steady, comforting. They sat together on the floor, surrounded by scattered screws and boards, sharing the silence of mutual understanding. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't certain. But it was real. And for Emma, that reality felt like both a beginning and a risk worth taking. Tonight had changed everything. The line between friendship and something more had been crossed, and neither of them could ignore it. And though the future remained uncertain, the spark between them had ignited. Unstoppable, undeniable, and impossible to forget. The rain had grown heavier, drumming against the windows in a steady, insistent rhythm, filling Emma's apartment with a sound that matched the storm of thoughts in her mind. The half-built bookshelf leaned against the wall, forgotten as the real work, the work of hearts. Of unspoken feelings took center stage. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands clasped in her lap, staring at Daniel as if trying to read the next moment in his eyes. Daniel stayed quiet, letting the tension hang, the weight of everything they had just admitted settling between them. He was careful, deliberate, but there was an unmistakable warmth in his gaze, an honesty that spoke louder than any words could. The apartment felt smaller now, every step closer to each other shrinking the space further, making the air thick and electric. Emma's chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. She wanted to speak, to run, to say something that would make it easier to retreat to the safety of friendship. But every instinct she had told her to stay. She could feel it in her bones, in the ache that had grown since the first brush of his hand on hers, in the steady pull of something neither of them could deny. Finally, Daniel broke the silence, his voice low, deliberate, and full of sincerity. "Emma, I need to know. If we do this, if we take this step, are you with me? Fully, completely. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back." Her throat tightened. She had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed words she never said, feared this exact question, and yet now, facing it, she couldn't speak. Her heart felt heavy and light at the same time, a mix of terror and exhilaration. She thought about all the years of laughter, support, and comfort they had shared, and how fragile it all might feel if they misstepped. But underneath the fear was something stronger, a longing she could no longer ignore. She began, then stopped. The words refused to come. Instead, she just looked at him, letting her gaze linger, speaking in silence what her voice could not. Daniel took a careful step closer, the space between them shrinking. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. A quiet certainty building despite the nerves. The storm outside was loud, but inside there was a moment of stillness, a pause where everything else ceased to exist except the two of them. "I've wanted this for a long time," he admitted quietly, his hand hovering near hers, almost touching, hesitant. "I just didn't know if it was the right time or if you felt the same. But tonight, it feels right. I can't pretend anymore." Her chest tightened and tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. She had spent years guarding her feelings, telling herself that friendship was enough, that love might ruin everything. But in that moment, she realized that her heart had already crossed the line she feared so much. She had gone too far emotionally, letting herself care, letting herself hope, letting herself imagine a life with him that went beyond friendship. Daniel's eyes searched hers, full of patience, understanding, and an undeniable hope. He wasn't rushing her, not pressuring her, just offering the chance for truth. "Emma," he said softly, "we don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to be honest with each other. That's all. Are you willing to try?" Emma took a deep breath, her hands clenching in her lap. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but it was also exhilarating. She had never felt more alive, more seen, more understood. "Yes," she whispered finally, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm willing to try, even if it's scary, even if it changes everything." Daniel's face softened, a smile breaking through the tension that had held them hostage all evening. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. The contact was firm but tender, full of meaning. It was a promise, a beginning, a silent agreement that whatever came next, they would face it together. They stayed like that for a moment, holding hands, letting the connection settle around them. Outside, the rain fell harder, but inside, the storm had quieted. There was no need for words. The touch, the shared gaze, and the mutual understanding said everything. Emma's mind wandered briefly to the future uncertain. unknown but filled with possibility. They could stumble, make mistakes, and feel awkward, but they had each other. That was the most important part. The fear of losing him still lingered, but the thought of not exploring this, of not allowing herself to feel, was far worse. "I've imagined this," she admitted quietly, "but it's different now, real, and it's better than I imagined." Daniel chuckled softly, a light sound that carried relief and warmth. "I've imagined it too," he said, "but I didn't know if I'd ever get to feel it like this with you, really here." The room seemed to breathe with them, the half-built bookshelf a silent witness to the moment. It didn't matter anymore that it wasn't finished, that screws were scattered, that rain tapped insistently against the window. What mattered was the honesty between them, the courage it took to let feelings spill over, and the shared knowledge that this night had changed everything. Emma felt tears slip freely now, not from sadness, but from relief, joy, and a deep sense of connection. She had crossed the line she feared, yes, but in doing so, she had found something she never expected: clarity, closeness, and the warmth of being truly known. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, a grounding touch that said he was there, that he understood, that he would not let go. "Whatever comes next," he said softly, "we'll figure it out together." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of the words settle deep in her chest. She had been afraid to step into this, to risk friendship for something more. But now she understood that some things are worth the risk. Some feelings cannot be ignored, and some connections are too strong to let slip away. They sat together in silence, the room still and full, the rain a steady backdrop to the unfolding of something beautiful. The spark that had started with a simple touch, a hand brushing against hers, had grown into something undeniable, a bond that promised honesty, vulnerability, and the beginning of a love that had been waiting quietly for years. Emma realized in that moment that the line had been crossed. Yes, but she did not regret it. She had gone too far in allowing herself to feel, but it had led her here, to the warmth of Daniel's hand, to the depth of his gaze, to a connection that felt both terrifying and perfect. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, Emma felt calm for the first time that night. She had faced the fear, embraced the unknown, and discovered that some things, like truth, honesty, and love, are worth stepping into, even when it changes everything. And in that quiet apartment, amid scattered screws and unfinished wood, Emma and Daniel discovered the beginning of something neither of them had dared to name before, but both had secretly hoped for.